Hello students, welcome to EPG Patshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today we will be discussing on the module Progressive Evolution of Man, Socio-cultural Dimensions from the paper Human Origin and Evolution. The learning objective of this module are to describe the pattern and type of the evolution, to understand the concept of the progressive evolution, the meaning of the social and cultural evolution, and socio-cultural dimension of the progressive evolution. Evolution in general term is defined as the process by which the living organisms change over successive generations and gradually develop from earlier form to new form. In other words, evolution is the process of matching and adapting organism to the new environment. Over time, evolution can follow the different type and patterns under the impact of the environment and other selective pressures. Mainly, there are 5 types of evolution. Number 1, the divergent evolution. It occurs when a population becomes isolated from the rest of the species. It becomes exposed to the new selective pressures and evolve into a new species. Number 2 is the convergent evolution. When the unrelated species occupy the same environment, they are subjected to the similar selective pressures and show similar adaptation. Number 3 is the parallel evolution. It describes 2 related species that have made similar evolutionary adaptation after their divergence from a common ancestor. The 4th is the progressive evolution, which occurs when simple form of the organisms evolve towards the complex forms. And the last is the retrogressive evolution. It describes the evolution of the complex form of organism towards the simpler form of the evolution. Now let us understand the progressive evolution of the man with a socio-cultural background. Man has evolved in a progressive manner from simple to the complex state. According to the Tyler, culture is an analogous to the cultural organisms. Since men evolved or developed in a uniform progressive manner, culture also followed that unilinear process. The evolution is building from Darwin's theory of the evolution and natural selection sought to track the development of the culture through time. Evolutionary theories are based on the assumption that societies gradually change from the simple beginning into the even more complex forms. Early sociologists, beginning with Auguste Comte, believed that human societies evolve in a unilinear way, that is, in one time of the development. According to their, social change meant progress towards something better. They saw change as positive and beneficial. To them, the evolutionary process implied that societies would necessarily reach new and the higher level of civilization. L.H. Morgan believed that there were 3 basic stages in the process, that is savagery, barbarism and civilization. Auguste Comte ideas relating to the 3 stages in the development of the human thought and also of the society, namely the theological, the metaphysical and the positive, in a way represents the 3 basic stages of the social change. This revolutionary view of the social change was highly influenced by the Charles Darwin theory of organic evolution. It is important to note that all of the early evolutionary schemes were unilinear. Unilinear evolution refers to the ideas that there is a set sequence of the stages that all groups will pass through at some point, although progress through these stages will vary. Groups, both past and the present, that are of the same level or stage of the development were considered nearly identical. Thus, a contemporary primitive group could be taken as a representative of an earlier stage of development of more advanced type according to the Long and the Chekhov. Those who were fascinated by this theory applied it to the human society and argued that societies must have evolved from the simple and the primitive to that of the too complex and advanced, such as the Western society. Herbert Spencer, a British anthropologist, carried this analogy to its extremity. He argued that society itself is an organism. He even applied Darwin's principle of the survival of the fittest to the human societies. He said that the society has been gradually progressing towards a better state. He argued that it has evolved from the military society to the industrial society. He claimed that Western races, classes or societies had survived and evolved because they were better adapted to face the condition of life. The view known as the social Darwinism got widespread popularity in the late 19th century. It survived even during the first phase of the 20th century. Emil Durkheim identified the cause of the societal evolution as a society's increasing moral destiny. Durkheim viewed societies as changing in the direction of the greater differentiation, interdependence and formal control under the pressure of the increasing moral destiny. He advocated that societies have evolved from a relatively undifferentiated social structure with minimum of division of the labor and with a kind of solidarity called the mechanical solidarity to more differentiated social structure with maximum division of the labor, giving rise to a kind of solidarity called the organic solidarity or evolutionary theory. Now let's understand the concept or the meaning of the socio-cultural evolution. Socio-cultural evolution and its name implies that it has two dimensions, social and the cultural. The definition of the social maturity refers to the social structures. Social can be defined as the set of the rules that govern all social interaction in a certain society. Some of the great social theorists of the last century defined culture in terms of the generally accepted knowledge of the certain society or social groups. Under this definition, knowledge is not limited to natural and social phenomena but includes, for example, religion, worldviews and moral values. Similarly, accepted does not imply that such knowledge is true according to scientific standards. For example, the Christian belief that the God created the world, but only that it is accepted within one culture as the true. Social evolution means the evolution of a communities or social structure and their organization, whereas the cultural evolution means the evolution of what is ordinarily called as the civilization, for which, however, the recognized scientific term is culture. Social evolution is a larger process than the cultural evolution. It is a process which began long before man appeared upon the earth, whereas cultural evolution is coexistent with the human life. Cultural evolution is a smaller process taking place within and arising out of the social evolution. Now let's see the origin of socio-cultural evolution. The factors of the socio-cultural evolutions are related to those of the organic evolution, since both are specific expression of more general evolutionary process. Biological and socio-cultural evolution of man have fueled each other, resulting in the fairly rapid evolution of men. The socio-cultural evolution of men is dominated by the biological evolution, wherein the factors of the heredity, variation and selection remains the supreme. The sum of the key points highlights the biological basis of socio-cultural evolution, and these are selection for a bipedal lifestyle freed up the hens, making later culturally possible. The development of the larger brain resulting in an increased cognition power, which in turn allowed the development of the tools and many other significant artifacts. Likewise, the development of the vocal organs in throat advanced and refined the speech. The larger human brain connected with the manpower of vocalization made possible the symbolization of his ideas and articulation of the speech or language, which allowed the spread of tradition and all human culture. Morgan was the first person with expert knowledge who attempted to introduce a definite order of the socio-cultural evolution as representing a global trend from savagery to barbarism to civilization, the predominant evolutionary trend in anthropology. Of the three main epochs, savagery, barbarism and civilization, Morgan described only first two and subdivided each of these epochs into lower, middle and upper stages, according to the progress made in the production of the means of subsistence. Now let's understand what is savagery. The lower stage or infancy of the human race. During this stage, men still lived in the original habitat, tropical or subtropical forest, dwelling at least partially in trees. This alone explains his continued survival in the face of the large beast of the prey. Fruits, nuts and the roots served him as the food. The formation of the articulate speech was the main achievement of this period. The middle stage began with the utilization of the fish and the other aquatic animals for food and with the employment of the fire. These two were contemporary since fish food became fully available only by the use of the fire. This new food, however, made man independent of the climate and locality. By following the rivers and the coast, they were able even in his savage state to spread over the greater part of the earth's surface. The crude, unpolished stone implements of the earlier Stone Age, the so-called Paleolithic, which belong wholly or predominantly to this period and were scattered over all the continent, were evidences of these migrations. The newly occupied territories as well as the unceasingly active usage for the discovery linked with their command of the art of producing fire by friction made available new foodstuffs such as the plant roots, tubers baked in the hot ashes or in the baking pits, ground ovens and games which was occasionally added to the diet after the invention of the first weapon, the club and the spear. This figure shows the rate of the change in the tool variety. As a consequence of the continued uncertainty with regard to sources of the food stuffs, cannibalism appears to have arisen at this stage and continued for a long period. Now let's have a look at the upper stage. During this stage, the bow and the arrow was invented, whereby the wild game became a regular item of the food and hunting became one of the normal occupation. Bow, string and the arrow constitutes a very composite instrument, the invention of which presupposed long accumulated experience and sharpened mental powers, and consequently a simultaneous acquaintance with a host of other inventors. Even at this early stage, from which point Morgan dates the transition to the barbarism, there were beginnings of the settlement in the villages, a certain mastery of the production of the means of subsistence, wooden vessels and utensils, finger weaving without looms, with filaments of the bast, baskets woven from the bast or the rushes, and polished Neolithic stone implements. For the most part also, fire and the stone X have already been provided, the dugout, canoe, and in the places timber and planks for the house building. Now let's come to the next stage, that is barbarism. The lowest stage of the barbarism dated from the introduction of the pottery. This stage had its origin in the coating of the baskets or the wooden vessels with clay in order to render them fireproof. The characteristic feature of the period of the barbarism is the domestication and breeding of the animals and cultivation of the plants. The middle stage began in the east with the domestication of the animals, in the west with the cultivation of the edible plant by means of irrigation and with the use of the bricks which are dried in the sun and stone for the building in suitable places. The formation of the herds led to the pastoral life. The domestication of the animals must have been first accompanied on the borders of such pasture lands. The plentiful meal and the milk diet among the Aryans and the Semites, and particularly the beneficial effect of these foods on the development of the children, may perhaps explain the superior development of these two races. In fact, the Pueblo Indians of the New Mexico, who are reduced to an almost exclusively vegetarian diet, have a smaller brain than the more meat and the fish eating Indians in the lower stage of the barbarism. At any rate, cannibalism gradually disappeared at this stage and survived only as the religious rite of what is almost identical to this instance, sorcery. The upper stage began with the smelting of the iron ore and passed into civilization through the invention of the alphabetic writing and its utilization for literary records. Above all, this stage encountered for the first time the iron plough drawn by the cattle, making possible the land cultivation on a wide scale, tillage, and in the conditions then prevailing a practically unlimited increase in the means of subsistence. But with this, there also came a rapid increase of the population and dense population in small areas. Improved iron tools, the bellows, the hand mills, the potter's wheel, the making of the oil and the wine, the working up of the metal developing into an art, wagons and the war chariots, ship building with the planks and beams, the beginning of the architecture as an art, walled towns with towers and battlements, the Homeric epic and the entire mythology, these were the chief heritage carried over by the Greeks in their transition from the barbarism to the civilization. Now let's see the civilization. Civilization was the period in which knowledge of the further working up of the natural products of the industry proper and of the art was acquired. According to Flannery, civilization refers to that complex of the cultural phenomena which tend to occur with the particular form of socio-political organization known as the state. This figure displays the type of the societies in ascending order of the socio-political complexity with ethnographic and archaeological examples of each. Now let's see what is an egalitarian society. The Benz, which is simplest of the egalitarian societies, whose only segments are the families or the group of the related families and whose means of integrations are usually limited to familial bonds of kinship and marriage plus common residence. Leadership is informal here and ephemeral. Division of labor is along the lines of the age and sex, and concept of the territoriality, descent or lineage are weakly developed. This organization is frequently found among the hunter and gatherers like the Australian Aborigines, the Bushmen and the Eskimos, and the Shoshone of the Great Basin. The next egalitarian society is that of the tribe. Tribe are the larger egalitarian societies whose segments are the group of the families related by the common descent or by membership in a variety of kinship-based groups, that is clans, lineage, descent lines, kindreds, etc. They are more common among the primitive agriculturists than among the hunters. Tribes like the Benz have weak and ephemeral leadership. They are further integrated by elaborate ceremonies and rituals. The next is the chiefdoms. During this stage, lineages are ranked with regard to each other, and men from birth are of chiefly or commoner descent regardless of their own individual capabilities. Chief in rank society are not merely of the noble birth but usually divine. They have special relationship with the god. Chiefdoms have large population with the village of the paramount chief sometimes running into the thousands. They also have a higher degree of the craft specialization both in necessities and luxury goods. Yet although there are village specialization, there is usually as yet no class of the craft specialist, no occupational caste as in the stratified societies. Let's come to the stratified society. The state is the next and the highest form of the socio-political organization. The state is a type of very strong, usually highly centralized government with a professional ruling class largely divorced from the bonds of the kinship which characterizes the simpler societies. It is highly stratified, that extremely diversified internally with the residential patterns often based on the occupational specialization rather than blood or the affinal relationships. The state attempts to maintain a monopoly of the force and is characterized by the true law. Almost any crime may be considered a crime against the state. States have a powerful economic structure. They are characterized by both reciprocal and redistribution exchange, and often by market as well. State numbering at least into the hundreds or thousands, often millions, they attain a high level of the artistic and scientific achievements. States have public buildings, works and service of the various sorts, usually implemented through professional architects, engineers and bureaucracies. The key development have been proposed as the prime movers in the formation of the states. These key features are irrigation. Carl Wittfogel believed that water is a resource of unusual qualities vital to the agriculture in arid lands, yet manipulated by the human societies in ways that other environment variables are not. He felt that the rise of the state lay in the establishment of a body of the ruler and official who provided the management of the large-scale hydraulic agriculture. The next is the warfare. For Carnero, warfare is surely a prime mover in the origin of the state. With the discovery of the possible defensive work, paintings of the war scenes and capture scenes on the stone monuments, for example, the murals and the Bonampak among the ancient Mayo scene regarded as the classic example of the peaceful civilization. The next is the population growth and the social circumstances. Most recently, population growth has been singled out as a prime mover of the origin of the state. Adoption of the new agricultural technologies led to the food surplus, which in turn stimulated the population growth as well as the leisure time in which to develop the art. According to Carnero, population pressure within a circumscribed area, for example a mountain ringed valley or a limited but fertile flood plain, the intolerable struggle for the scarce land or resource triggers the warfare, which leads to cooperation, competition, mutual defense and eventually state government to keep the peace and allocate resources. The trade is another one. Several of the areas where early civilization arose were lacking in the raw material thought to be essential to daily life. A lack of the building stone, wood and metal was long held to be responsible for stimulating the trade in many areas. Earlier polities from the tribes to the state all tend to be ethnically homogeneous, in that the people speak the same language, have the similar custom, material, culture, etc. Later, polities develop into overall or many different ethnic groups living together under a single centralized government. The socio-cultural evolution of the men can also help us to make some educated guesses about the possible future of the mankind. The hypothesis of the universal modernization implies that only Western societies are truly modern ones and that the process of modernization will change all societies until they become modern in the Western sense. Albeit with the local variants, the European and eventually Western process of modernization is characterized by certain economic, political, educational and gender-based criteria that are indicator of the modern development if we apply these criteria to the developmental process in different countries. We can detect astonishing parallels to the Western history. The economical relevance of the agrarian sector is decreasing in developing countries, even in Africa, whereas industry is gaining its importance. The same trend is valid for the urbanization processes. In all developing countries, the rural population is decreasing as large cities emerge, just as happened in Europe in the 18th century. All of the trends that are now visible in developing countries were seen previously in the Europe and the North America as they progressed towards the modern Western culture. Now let's summarize what we have learned so far in this module. The idea of the progressive evolution is that of the improvement in the betterment of the human life. It does not imply movement in a desirable direction. The early hunter-gatherer societies or the segmentary differentiated tribal societies, as they are called in anthropologies, are homogeneous. There is the little differentiation of the social rules, which are mostly based on the gender and the age. The creative potential of these early humans could not unfold. Small degree of the labor division did not allow for the special roles, and a common worldview of the animalistic religious further hindered individual thinking. It took a long time for those societies to become sufficiently heterogeneous to generate the creative achievements of the Neolithic revolution, which in turn changed the social structure of the societies. The segmentary differentiated societies became stratified into the social hierarchical and allowed a significant division of the labor. Yet it took a long time to achieve this stage of the socio-cultural evolution, and many tribal societies did not reach it at all because only small process of the differentiation took place and creative individual could only slowly create the new ideas in their respective society. The long period of the time between the biological emergence of the Homo sapiens and the Neolithic revolution was necessary to allow this slow process to generate a sufficiently heterogeneous society that could move to the next step in the evolutionary process. In other words, the Neolithic revolution could only take place when some societies were sufficiently differentiated to allow for individual creative processes. The general hypothesis about the socio-cultural evolution, the historical data, and our stimulation can apparently explain the human history as an evolutionary process. In particular, they can explain the special path of the Europeans and subsequently Western culture. All of the socio-cultural dimensions of the evolutionary progress of men are internally complex and none are inevitable universals. There can be divergence and even reversals in any of the general trend, and differential culture will have their own particular manifestation of each element. There are linkages among all of these, though again the connections are not inevitable and globally universal. Each represents a separate line that can be examined cross-culturally and across time to extract and explain the common trajectory of the evolutionary change. It is also possible to look at the intersection of the differential trajectories and examine how they may be connected or disconnected in individual culture, histories, and universal pattern of evolution. Thank you.